Good morning, and thanks for coming to the Data Colada seminar series. I'm really happy here to have Jason Dana joining us today. And in addition to Jason, we will have 5 interesting panelists: Cindy Kreider, Sam Johnson, George Newman, Sydney Scott, and Guy Wojcik. In addition, of course, Joe Simmons and Yuri Simonson will be with us today to also participate in the discussion. For all of you who are attending today, you'll see at the bottom of your screen you can submit questions through the Q&A. Some of those questions, hopefully, Jason will get a chance to answer. But also because both George and Guy are his co-authors, they might get a chance to answer as well. So absolutely use that function. So with that, Jason. The floor is yours, conditional on you turning on your video and sharing your screen.
All right, I am just sharing now, and then let's see, starting my video. Do you see my presentation? Okay, I'm off to a rip-roaring start. So as Leif already mentioned, this is work with George Newman and Guy Wojcik, who's a very talented PhD student in our program, and they'll be in the chat, hopefully helping me out with questions. In case that I crash today, or my internet goes out, or your internet goes out, here's everything I'm going to tell you. People think that the real prices of various groceries, consumer durables, and energy have gone up in recent decades, and that they're going to continue to rise. In almost all cases, they've gone down. And these are the sorts of things, by the way, that, as we have increased productivity, increased efficiency, we ought to be able to produce more cheaply and easily. And we're going to implicate something we call efficiency neglect as one reason why that is. So consumers recognize that as population increases, we're going to have increased scarcity and rising prices. But somehow they fail to account for how scarcity is going to drive innovations, right? It's going to make us reinvent ways of doing things or find substitutes so that we make our production more efficient and reduce costs. And what's key in this is that people do seem to know these things, I'll show. They believe, at least, that we have had technological innovation that should be making productivity cheaper, but they somehow aren't using that knowledge. And I guess that shouldn't be too surprising because the scarcity effects are sort of first order, right? Whereas the things I'm talking about are dynamic and downstream usually. Now, George and I have thought for quite a while about what we call lay economics. And this is just people's mental models and lay beliefs about different aspects of an economy. I'm not sure who's in attendance today, but perhaps some of you have seen me speak on this topic. We're pretty jazzed about lay economics because it's how people reason about how they get their stuff. So for example, if you're interested in consumer behavior, understanding this could be a basis for kind of understanding everything. So we think this stuff is cool. And today's topic falls specifically under what we call naive beliefs about the macroeconomy or pessimistic biases. So lay people are just much more pessimistic about the macroeconomy than are trained economists for whatever reason. So lay people expect there to be higher inflation, higher unemployment, and less growth than trained economists do. And in our kind of small convenience sample of economists, we find that they don't do this, what we're talking about today. So even though I have a very small sample, I can say pretty confidently, like almost every item we asked them about, the majority of them thought that these items have gotten cheaper over time in real terms. And we can hardly ever find a lay sample that thinks that. Usually it's the reverse. A lay sample will think almost everything we ask about has gotten more expensive over time in real terms. And I don't even know labor economists, like the people we ask to answer these sort of surveys are going to be like experimental economists or theoretical economists that are interested in behavioral stuff. but they remember from their graduate training, as one guy told me, yeah, that's not surprising. Haven't you ever seen the productivity graphs? Like, it's pretty uncontroversial that productivity is rising. I say that just to say that I do think that there's a mental model that's wrong here, like a cognitive model that people have that's incorrect, that a trained professional has, okay? Now this efficiency neglect, in some sense, has cropped up across, basically since there's been written human history. So Pierre Desrochers is a geographer that's done some really cool writing on this topic. And pretty much as far as you can go back, there have been people arguing that we are necessarily going to use up all of our limit, all of our resources as population gets larger. So apparently Confucius and his buddies, according to some historians, thought that, they hypothesized that as populations got larger, that we would become necessarily worse off in terms of quality of life, right? Like there would necessarily be less stuff go around, so we would get much poorer. A short time later, Plato and then Aristotle. I couldn't find pictures of these guys. But, one of the things they thought a lot about was the appropriate size of a polis, of a city-state. And they were very concerned at what would happen if it ever got too big. And they basically said this is going to lead to famine and fights over resources. And they suggested such policies as population control through abortion, but also maybe exposing children to the elements and basically casting people out would be inevitable if populations got too big. So pretty harsh, right? A few hundred years after that, the early Christian theologian Tertullian, he said, look, our wants always grow more and more and nature can't keep up. And so it's probably a good thing that we have pestilence and famine and wars and such. They're a remedy because they prune the luxuriance of the human race, right? So again, like the need to control populations. And then, of course, Thomas Malthus is the most famous of what we could call the, he of the Malthusian trap and population bombs, right? He said that, look, population, if it goes unchecked, it is going to grow in a geometric ratio, and our subsistence never will. At best, it's going to be arithmetical, no matter what we do. I guess we could call all these people sort of depletionists, right? And Malthus is the king depletionist. And now, since we're in data Colada, I have to disclose that I used some researcher degrees of freedom here. When I was choosing a photo of Malthus, I tried to pick one where he looked the most pompous, because I don't agree with him and I want to impugn him maximally. So, but at least I'm disclosing that, so it's not so bad. But okay. So throughout time, people have thought that necessarily, life has to get worse and things have to get more expensive because resources are limited and people will continue to grow. The third study I'm going to show you today, in fact, mirrors that. So we're going to show that when you ask people, how much they expect real prices to grow, this is basically a proxy for the question, how limited are the resources that go into that product? Right? They basically treat it as if it's the exact same question. An economist understands it's not the same question for a couple of reasons that I already just hinted at. For one, when things become really expensive, you're going to substitute away from them to alternatives that aren't as expensive. So if you think we have a lot of Impossible burgers now and fake meat now, what do you think is going to happen if beef becomes really rare or expensive, or pork becomes really rare or expensive? And then, of course, price pressures will force us to think more about innovations and invent new technologies that allow us to find resources or to produce them more efficiently or waste them less, etc. Now, before modern economists, there were very few voices that echoed what I just said, that basically spoke out against the depletionist view. But oddly, one of the most famous ones, or one of the most ardent opponents of this view, was Friedrich Engels. So he co-authored with Marx the Communist Manifesto, okay? And what did Friedrich Engels say? Friedrich Engels said, okay, yeah, the extent of land is limited. All right. Because that's how people wrote back then. Like a sentence could be all right, broken into 2 words. And then he just goes on to say, like, look, people are mouths to feed, but they're not just mouths to feed. They're also arms to work, right? And even if you start to have so many people that the returns to these arms to work start to diminish, people are also minds to create. People come up with new solutions. They find better ways to do things. And because our ideas tend to build on each other, the minds won't have the diminishing returns like the arms to work will, right? So he basically says productivity of the soil can be increased infinitely by the application of capital, labor, and science, right? I'm really glad to be able to quote Engels, because some people are struck by this work that it's something that would be the product of a free market ideologue, right? And I think this is false, right? This is just clear thinking about economics and demography and reckoning with historical fact. But look, again, even if you don't wholly swallow that, I'll show you in study 4 today that people believe, at least they think they know, that you know, there are technological innovations that allow us to be more productive, but they tend not to use that when they think about how cost of living is going to change unless they're prompted to do so, okay? So what, right? I mean, I think this is just a cool fact of the world as it stands. Like, you know, people have lived, and yet they somehow are wildly miscalibrated about the cost of living, even when they've experienced it. But maybe you'd say, so what? Like, do people have to be good at this? And I think this is important for a couple of reasons. One, just that consumer confidence in and of itself is held to be an important topic. So economists, you know, they have the Consumer Confidence Index. People are interested in measuring it. And it's thought to be a harbinger of things to come. If consumer confidence is falling, it could predict recessions or lower growth, et cetera. So there's that. And this is a source of pessimism about the economy, an important source. But I think even maybe more importantly is that this intuitive yet flawed mental model has persisted throughout human history. It always rises to the top like some bloated corpse. And the manifestations, they vary across time and culture. May not always look the same. But all these people I mentioned, you know, they had very specific policy ideas in mind, okay? So maybe today we're not discussing casting people out, right? But think about your views on immigration, for example. Now, if you think of immigrants as more mouths to feed, then you're probably not very enthusiastic about the impact on an economy of immigrants. You may still support taking in more immigration for moral reasons, human rights, or charity. But if you see immigrants as arms to work and minds to create, right, you may more properly understand immigration as part of a vital economy. And I'll show you limited evidence about that in the 5th study I'll show you today. So you know, when prompted to think about efficiency gains, people can become more less zero-sum minded about immigration. Yeah. Okay. So that's my. Yeah. Go ahead.
A question about the historical perspective, since you've been. This seems like probably the right time to ask that, since I'm guessing you're not going to be going back to that too much.
No.
So when Malthus was writing in the 19th century, I think some people might argue that he wasn't entirely wrong back then when he was writing. Like if you looked at productivity gains in, say, the Middle Ages, I'm guessing that they aren't nearly as impressive as they were during the Industrial Revolution or in the times of, say, Plato and Aristotle. So I was just wondering if you could comment on the extent to which you think that this view was always wrong versus the extent to which you think it happens that we live in a time now and for the past couple hundred years when this is quite clearly not the right way of thinking about the economy, but maybe over the course of history when people were thinking about this, it wasn't such a crazy view.
Yeah, thanks for asking that too, because there was something I meant to say along those lines and forgot to, and now you're going to let me do it. I mean, it's not surprising that so many thinkers across time have thought this, because it's really intuitive. And you're right, at any particular cross section, there might be stuff that going, you know, before we've had the chance for innovation to overcome scarcity. We may have problems in any cross section, but I'm pretty strong on this. I think like it's surprising that so many great minds adhere to this, because over the long haul of history, they've been totally wrong. In Malthus's time, there were way more people on the earth than Confucius and Plato and Aristotle could have ever imagined. And right now, there's way more people on the earth than Malthus was imagining. And in all these times, there's also way more abundance on the earth than any of those people could have imagined, right? So it just has never panned out. Now, whether we should expect it to pan out, that's more of an interesting issue, right? I think it's interesting that trained economists do, and smart lay people don't. But again, I'm going to fall back on, I'm not going to argue as to whether we should have known it all along, but just to say is people do have knowledge that they hold that could have ameliorated this tendency to think that real prices are always getting higher, but they have failed to apply the knowledge. I think that's an important piece of it. Is that sort of answer?
Yep, totally answers the question. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, maybe we should start to talk about data. I heard you guys like that. But first, how do you do data with this? Because real prices is a very tricky thing. My dad was very old when he had me. So when I grew up, I was regaled with stories about how low prices used to be. He'd say a hard ice cream cone cost 3 cents. A car was $5. You wanted to buy someone's house, you gave them 20 and slapped them in the mouth, and you're even, you're square. So, but one thing my dad never explained was what salaries used to be. He never talked about what salaries were a long, long time ago. And so there could be some confusion as to what my father means to convey by these stories. If he simply means to convey that it now costs more money to buy stuff than it used to, well, yeah, the money supply is larger. And the economists would tell you that money is less scarce. What I need to know is how hard is it to get that money to buy stuff? What do I have to give up to get stuff, right? So you need that second piece of the puzzle. So what we do in a lot of our studies is use this kind of funny metric that we've borrowed from some economic studies, where you're somehow taking the nominal price of something and you're dividing it by some sort of measure of wages. And so then you can say, how long do you have to work to buy something? And that would be our measure of a real price. That's what something really costs. How long do you have to work? So the Board of Labor Statistics has these wonderful online data sets that could tell you, for instance, for a whole bunch of different products, what's the average price that people have to pay across all US cities, okay? And so you can get an average price index there. For consumer durables, our price indexes tended to be old Sears catalogs. So Sears, did a catalog every year or quarterly every year, and they had different product lines. So they might have Sears Best lawnmower, Sears Best refrigerator. So you could take the price from a former year from that, and then you could look at Sears.com now, and you could say, well, okay, for a similar powered thing, similar size thing, similar product line, what are they charging now, right? The Board of Labor Statistics also has this other wonderful thing they track, which is wages. And particularly, they have this measure that does not roll off the tongue. It's called the average hourly and weekly, well, we're going to focus on hourly, average hourly earnings of production and non-supervisory employees on private non-farm payrolls. This just means that we're looking at people who are privately employed, but we're not looking at CEOs and things like that. We're looking at people in manufacturing, mining, construction, retail, et cetera, and we're saying, what's the average amount they're getting paid at any given time? Okay, and so this is the task then that we give to people. We quiz them on it, and we make them pass the quiz before they can go on and answer questions. But we want people, like we'll maybe give people the amount of time you had to work to buy something in one time period. And then we'll ask them to estimate or to guess how long you'd have to do it in another time period. a couple things that I like about this measure. One is that, you can't just declaratively remember it, and you can't just sort of draw upon it. So it's tapping into your beliefs about the cost of living, but you have to use some sort of theories about like whether things are getting more expensive, less expensive, et cetera, to answer. You can't remember, oh, I worked 12 minutes to buy that 15 years ago, and today I'm working 11 minutes or something. So to drive home something I said earlier about how real prices have changed. Yeah, go ahead.
Jason, this is a tiny point, but just in thinking about these issues like average amount needed to work, or average salary, or average income, or whatever, the distribution of those numbers is clearly not normal. And so when you invoke the idea of like, well, how much would someone have to work, they're presumably thinking of the median or the mode, if you will. And that's going to be pretty far from the average, at least it might be. And I can also imagine that the shape of that distribution changes over time, right? So if you have more wealth dispersion or more income distribution that goes wider, then the average will move up even if the median is staying lower, something like that.
Yeah, that's a very tough problem to get around, as you could appreciate. The subjects at least know we're asking about average. And at least by using a measure like this, which isn't as highly skewed as just incomes in general, right? We're truncating things down, so this is much less of a problem. There's no CEO, there's no professional athlete or something like that in this data set pulling up the mean way, way far higher than the median. And you do have, of course, minimum wages in time periods, so that this is helping to keep the, while not normal, much less skewed than generally income would be, where that would be a much larger problem. Okay, so look, here are a bunch of products we chose and asked people about, and there's your 1980 amount of time you'd have to work for them, and then current amounts of time. You'd see almost everything has gotten cheaper except for bacon. So apparently the largest issue facing our nation is a lack of innovation in pork products, right? We need to fix this. But, and for some things, like say power tools, I mean, like the drop is dramatic. Things could be like 1/7 of as small as 1/7 of what they used to cost. So what we do is to give people the amount of time in one time period. So here's like current, and then ask them how much work did it take in 1980 in a qualitative question. Is it much less to much more on some Likert type scale? And then we ask them, okay, take your best guess of the exact amount that you'd have to work. And we do this both ways. We might give you 1980 and ask and guess current, or here we give you current and guess 1980. So here I'm when I say the current actual, like and the 1980 guess, I'm giving you the median guess, because the same problem that Leif was talking about, like people could guess crazy things and pull. So this is the median guess. And then next to each one, I'm giving you a little histogram of how they answered the Likert type question. And you could see for almost all the items, their guess is that things were lower priced in 1980. Some of those appliance type things are shading a little higher for 1980. I think because it's so surprising when you see the truth, like, oh my gosh, you can get a fridge in 20 hours, you can get a table saw in 8 hours. How much lower could it ever have been? So right, people are confident that prices have gone up, like 1980 was lower, when the opposite is true. And then when you flip it, you give them the 1980 and you have them current, even that effect goes away with the appliances. So now this end of the Likert scale means more currently, and you could see they think that every item is more currently, and both quantitatively and qualitatively, strongly so. Particularly gas, keep that one in your noggin, right? Like that's interesting, like also not just that people make mistakes, but what kind of mistakes they're making, because that's part of why we think people do this. So just to give you another way to quantify how much inflation there is, and I shouldn't use the word inflation, but how much people have overestimated costs of living. If you take the current actual and then take the current guess that they gave, by giving them the 1980 actual, you'll see that prices are typically badly inflated, usually by a factor of 2 and sometimes more, okay? So I don't know what to say. People do this, I told you.
Jason,
we've run, yeah.
Can I ask you another question? What do you think people are, how do you think people are answering these questions? Are they, and in particular, I'm wondering if you think that they are trying to still interpose the monetary estimates somewhere in the middle of this process. So it's a really clever method because it gets around the inflation problem really well. And it shows us that it's definitely not the case that they're just confused or there's some money illusion or something like that. But I still feel like maybe there's some money related thinking going on that's somewhere in the thought process. And I was just wondering if you either thought that had something to do with it, or if you have an alternative model of what's going on in people's heads.
Well, I'll answer in a couple ways. First of all, what do I think people are doing? We've run a lot of these. I think they just look at the number we give them, whether it's the current or 1980, and then they just adjust away from it, kind of like an anchor, right? But what's key here is that they're adjusting usually in the wrong direction. Like, the thing I can speak most confidently about is that their theory is that real prices are going up, not down, right? And that's the meat of the thing. Now, as I've said, we've run a lot of these type studies. I don't want to show you 5 or 6 of the same type of study with wrinkles. I'll just say this replicates for items that people say that they commonly purchase. So it's not necessarily lack of familiarity with the item. It replicates when subjects separately estimate nominal prices and wages, and then you stick those together. Although I can say a lot of the action, apropos of Leif's point, is on wages. Right? They don't think wages are rising much. They're sometimes wrong about prices, but not in a systematic way. So, they're all over the place with prices, but wages they don't think are moving much. They think they've barely changed since 1980, which is, they're almost 5-fold from then. Inflating prices, the tendency to inflate prices correlates with pessimism on consumer confidence index questions. So I don't think they're just answering nonsense here, because you ask them the more standard questions about pessimism, about the economy, and this sort of accords with it. And there's a whole bunch of questions that you could ask that are just much more direct about the cost of living. And, these things sort of confirm our results. So the same subjects that are saying that, you have to work longer to buy things also say that people spent a lower percentage of their income on food in 1980, just stunningly wrong. That the cost of living, whatever that's supposed to mean, was lower in 1980. Or that people had more slack income or money to spare after their expenses in 1980. So these things all sort of corroborate that they really believe life is getting more expensive, I think. But still, okay, yeah, go ahead.
More strongly for some kinds of items than others? Is there like any systematicity to
Yeah,
where?
we're getting, yeah. I'll just real quick breeze through a more careful recent study we did, because, a lot of people have questions about, well, the particular instantiation we use. So look, we just did a replication with a nationally representative sample, 1,000 people. And here, we let first respondents choose a subset of 10 from our 20 items we gave them that they felt most comfortable to estimate, okay? And the items were generated from a pre-study that had people name items they commonly buy, with the constraint that we had to recourse to the ones for which we had price data. Sometimes we don't have price data for something that people commonly buy. And we only asked about a 10-year period for this study. And we did 2009 to 2019 because we didn't want to ask about after pandemic. That's a little complicated. But this is a much shorter time period, so you can't say that people have forgotten or never experienced it the way that you would with 1980. And then we paid people bonuses for guessing accurately. So there's some incentive to to get these answers right, although probably not enough incentive to research, figure out that you can get all this information on the BLS website, and if you search around hard enough, you can calculate it. So, okay, and basically, so here's the 20 items, and as you can see, there's a little bit more variance here because it's only a 10-year period. But again, most things got cheaper in real terms, in terms of how long you had to work, except that darned bacon, right? Bacon is just out of control. And then, you know, again, I'll put them in bold. The 2019 guesses are all, this is the median guess again. The median is always way above the 2009 price. So people always think all the items are getting more expensive, and they're usually far above the 2019 price. So again, there's a significant overestimation of the real cost of things, right? Even when they have risen, people think they rose even more than that, and they think everything's rising, okay? So let's put that aside and talk about the more fun stuff, which is there a systematicity to it, right? Like we want to, you know, what's about the efficiency neglect? Is there anything to it? So I'll show you a couple different glances at this. Now, the first one, we'll just call this study Expectations of Real Price Increase Are Basically Depletionist, right? Everyone's like Malthus and Tertullian and Plato. Maybe, I mean, I'm overselling it there a little, but here's what we did. We have some subjects do the kind of task we're talking about here. They're rating whether various goods are going to be much less expensive in terms of how long you have to work to buy them to much more, and we have them do it into the future. We've done it into the past too, but for here, I'll present you one where they're guessing about 2060. So what's to come, okay? And then a different group of subjects rates the abundance of the resources needed to produce these goods, from somewhere from completely limited to completely unlimited. This is real fuzzy, but I'll show you what we did, right? This is what we did. So we tell them you're gonna rate unlimited to limited, and we try to define these things. If it's limited, there's a certain amount we can produce and that's it. If it, to the extent that it's more unlimited, we can keep making more. It's not gonna run out. And we give them examples. So gold would be strictly limited. If everyone on the earth wanted a pound of gold, there's nothing we could do to give them it, all right? There just isn't enough gold, gold will run out. Sunlight, on the other hand, is probably the closest thing to unlimited because, you know, if you all have some sunlight, it doesn't take away necessarily from my sunlight, right? We could, you know, more people can enjoy sunlight without depleting it, okay? And so, again, fuzzy concept, I think, not the clearest construct you ever came up with, but we have people rate it. And then what we can do is plot their expectations of where prices are going against this limitedness rating. And so here's the first study we did it with, and the correlation is 0.92, right? Now again, this is much higher than the correlations would be at the individual level. This is the group's rating of whether the price is going to increase or decrease. And this is the group's mean rating of the limitedness of supply. But the point being, you know, that these are also noisy measures, right? So when you take some of the noise out of it, if people in general tend to think something's going to get more expensive, this is equivalent to them saying they think it's going to run out. And what they're missing, of course, and I'll repeat it, I've said it before, you're missing two things. You're missing that as things become more expensive, you're going to substitute out to other alternatives, which naturally pulls the price down. And you're going to have a lot of incentive to innovate and come up with new and better ways to produce it and waste less of it. And if you want to see that people are missing something here, look at the scatter plot. Power is the thing they think is the most unlimited. Sorry, I have that rating backwards. Darn it. 9 is limited. I'm going to blame someone else. One of my co-authors must have handed me this scatter plot. Sorry. So 1 is unlimited, 9 is limited. We did it that way so you have a positive correlation a little bit. So the most unlimited thing here, my apologies, is power. So they apparently recognize that we have a lot of ways to produce power, But the same people who are saying power is unlimited are saying gas is highly limited. But gas is just a form of powering things, and if it became expensive, right? Like, so it doesn't make any sense from the standpoint of dynamic thinking about an economy. But I think the best thing that people can do is think of, supply and demand are like co-determined functions of each other. That's very complicated. I think the best people can do is think of them as separate entities, then one gets ahead of the other. Okay. Now, we don't have that many items here, and gas is kind of way out there. So we reran this and threw in like 20 items and even tried to find some items that we thought might decrease in price. And again, we replicate it. So we have a correlation of 0.87 between the limitedness ratings and how much people think prices will increase. Although I'm angry at our subjects. Look at data storage. This is the quintessence of unlimited, right? And it doubles every year. So if they had just put that to the left, this correlation would be above 0.9. All right, sometimes your subjects are wrong. Your data is wrong. But anyway, so very high correlations. We take that to indicate, something like that when people answer these questions, what they're thinking of is limitedness, right? And that's not exactly what a price is. They're two different things. So these are basically depletionist ideas. Okay, but we can go further in demonstrating the mechanism by trying to prime these things, right? And try to manipulate and see if we can push people's estimates around. Okay, so here's an example of that. We're doing study 4, and I'm going to call this priming efficiency ameliorates this tendency, but priming scarcity does nothing. So what we have people do is rate 6 different items on whether they take much less to much more time to buy now than they did in 1980. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Jason, because before we get into this one, I want to ask a question that came up in a couple of the questions people have submitted, but I have it also, and that's essentially, what are there in your participant pool? I assume you at least occasionally measure something about their income or wealth, and I'm curious if that individual difference predicts any of these things. I can kind of imagine it going a few different directions, so think of it as purely just curiosity.
I'll let my co-authors weigh in a little bit too in the chat. I'm not where it regards the prices. I'm not particularly aware of any demographics that that significantly moderate. Okay. So you might think that older people are like, when you ask about the 1980 stuff particularly, you might think that older people would be better at it. They're actually like ever so slightly worse. Like, Irish correlations, 04, 07, like more age, more inflation of real prices. Small differences in politics. I think that a conservative does this just a little bit less, but nowhere near accurate. Like right? Like that's completely washed out. Now, do any of these things meaningfully interact with the effect of like limit type things, or like these manipulations I'm going to show you? Yeah, I'm not sure, but I'm not aware of anything particular. I guess I could just say that I haven't checked everything that one could check, and we could certainly look harder for demographic signals that might interact with it.
But your summary sense is that there might be something there, but it's at least not the big story. This is fairly uniform across different groups and incomes and all of that. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So far, the only group that we've ever used demographically that caused intraocular trauma said, oh, that's different. Those were people with a PhD or getting a PhD in econ. Right? We don't have many of them, but when we gave it to them, most items are judged to be getting cheaper, and that just jumps off the page because that just doesn't happen. Right? It's hard to find a group for which that happens. Yeah. So where were we? So we're priming efficiency, or we're priming scarcity. So we have people rating 6 different items, again, on this time work to buy it kind of measure. And they're basically proffering their theory as to whether These things must have gotten less expensive or more expensive since 1980. And then what we do, though, before they answer each of the six, is to give them some sort of prime. Sometimes that's an efficiency prime, or sometimes that's a scarcity prime, or sometimes we do nothing. All right. So this particular study, 100 per condition. And what would be example primes? So, for instance, the efficiency prime might be to ask people, is current extraction and refinement of oil more or less efficient than it was in 1980? Versus a scarcity prime, which might look like, is the remaining supply of usable oil in the world today lower or higher than it was in 1980? Now, you might say these are very heavy-handed prompts to ask right before you're going to ask a question like, how have gas prices changed? And you would be correct. But I have two things to say about that. One of them is, we're not regaling people with facts about how the world has gotten more efficient or about how things have become more scarce. We're asking them what they think, but we think they know, right? We think most people are going to say, yeah, I guess it's got to be more efficient than 1980, or I guess there's got to be less of it around them, right? And by and large, our subjects answer these questions the way we think they do. Also, to the extent that the efficiency prime is heavy-handed, so is the scarcity prime. So they both should be doing something relative to a control. I'm going to show you that that's not true, right? Or a different example is the average yield per acre of agricultural land today higher or lower than it was in 1980 versus are there more or less acres of agricultural land per person today than there were in 1980? And then you might ask about the price of apples, okay? So quick results. As you can see, the orange bars are a limit prime and the gray bar is the nothing, the control. The limit prime doesn't do much of anything, right? Like, it doesn't make much difference, whereas the blue bars represent the efficiency prime, and they ameliorate this tendency. Now, look, we've cut the scale only from about the same to more now, like the 0 to 1. We never were able to push people, at least with these, to a point where they're saying it's less now, but they're certainly a lot less confident that real prices have increased, right? So the omnibus effect here is significant, and then the chicken and the power and gas are all significantly lower, and I guess the fridge and the tomatoes are like 0.06. So you have an omnibus effect in effect across, even at the individual level, you know, of the prime across a lot of the items, right? So, and this was the contention I led with earlier. People know this stuff. We're not telling them, oh, hey, look at all the ways the world has gotten more efficient. But when you ask them to consider it, they're more likely to use it in their estimates of how prices have changed. Whereas, you know, telling them about, making them think about limitedness, about scarcity, doesn't do anything, because we argue, but that's the prepotent tendency. That's what people have always thought about, right? Scarcity is always top of mind. So there's nothing really new there. Okay.
So Jason, I have a quick question. It's Cindy. So, you know, you're suggesting that maybe scarcity is something that people are incorporating and efficiency is not. Do you think if we lived in a world where nominal prices didn't increase, would we still see these effects because people are still thinking of scarcity? Or would we not, because the assumption of nominal price and scarcity go together?
Yeah, this is a good point, and I wish we had. I thought about studies on this, and I have so I'm going to tell you anecdotes instead. Because I think this is an interesting thing that we've thought about study designs for, but we don't have the goods for you yet today. But right, what about those rare items where the nominal price actually goes down? Now you're stupefied, right? Like, there's nothing you can do to deny that those items have gotten cheaper. And the existence of those items, I'm sure, at least prompts people to say, okay, well, not everything got more expensive. But the question is, does that spark any kind of realization, right? So I'll give you example. I've interviewed people about this, like just clinically. Just give you an example of how people reason through this. I'll talk, well, look at TVs, right? You show them like some giant like box of a piece of furniture from 1980. It's got a 25-inch screen. It has no resolution, whatever resolution means. It's terrible by all standards. Today, nominal. You could get like a flat screen that hangs on the wall with a bezel this thin, cheaper than you could, in nominal terms, buy that hunk of crap in 1980. You say, well, what happened there? And people will tell me, well, there it's obvious that that technology, the technology made it easier to produce TVs, made it cheaper to produce TVs, and that's why they're cheaper. That's a very interesting thing for people to say. Something I didn't present, but that George and I have played with a lot in the past, is some scales that he invented based on conversations we have with our parents. And they're called the I'm getting screwed scale, right? And these, this just sort of tests people's conspiratorial notions of pricing, right? So we have them agree or disagree with all sorts of items, probing why prices tend to get higher, right? And the things that people agree with a lot is that companies are screwing us, and companies are keeping a larger share of the surplus, and they take advantage of us more than they ever used to do, which implies a pretty peculiar mental model of industrial organization, right? These people don't operate in, these firms don't operate in competitive markets where they take prices. They make prices, and whenever they can get away with screwing us over, they do. What happened? Now the TV got cheaper, and the very mental model people are implying is that because their input costs got cheaper, our retail costs got cheaper, which means they passed on the savings to us. A totally different model of industrial. So apparently only TV makers and the few other products where nominal prices have fallen are operating in competitive markets. Everybody else is a monopolist of varying altruism. They just screw us more and less than each other, right? But so it's funny, like people do tell you a sensible story of why the price went down, but it doesn't seem to me to spill over into their understanding of prices more generally or cost of living more generally. But I wish I had like more systematic studies to present to you on that. Now I know what I'm going to put on Qualtrics tonight. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you for that question. That's very good.
Jason, I have a quick question to follow up on that. This is Sydney.
Yeah.
So it sounds like people are aware of prices changing. I wonder if you get a sense that they're neglecting wages changing as well, and that's driving the effect in addition to some efficiency neglect. That if you brought attention to wage changes, they'd get a little better, though probably not accurate.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think that prompting, because of what I told you earlier, that I think a lot of the action on this comes on the wage side. But and again, that's the kind of thing people don't declaratively talk about, you don't remember. Probably you would force people to reconsider their answers if you prompted them with wage data, right? Because they'd be like, oh wow, has it really gone up that much? And where can you go from there, right? You can't change your memory drastically of what prices have done. So I guess you'd have to admit, my prediction is that, though, I haven't tried it with like forward-looking predictions, and of course we don't know whether forward-looking predictions are correct, but I somehow think that people will still anticipate that the cost of living is going to rise in the future, like even if corrected a little bit with impressions on wage. But that's a hypothesis. That I'm running on Saturday on Qualtrics now. Thank you. Yeah, okay, good question.
I think I have your Sunday study too, maybe. So
okay, wow. I'm gonna have a busy weekend. My wife is mad at you guys.
So there are a lot of different reasons why productivity can increase. It could be that there are technological changes, which seems like a lot of what you're talking about are these kinds of innovations, but there's also just capital acquisition. There is changes in human capital. There could be an expansion in markets, allowing for economies of scale, which kind of links with some of those other things, or a greater division of labor. And I wonder if you think that people are better at understanding some of those kinds of efficiency gains versus others. Like, it sounds like maybe the technology one's a little bit easier to grasp compared to the other ones, but I'm wondering if you either have any data that might speak to that, or any intuitions about that.
I don't have data. I'm sure that you're probably right, though. you know, so that as a first pass, there's a lack of appreciation of efficiency gains, but there's probably some types of efficiency gains that are going to be easier to appreciate than others, right? Like that's almost surely true.
Like, I feel like the differences in productivity across countries, say across developing and developed countries, I think people have basically no intuition for why wages differ so wildly across different countries in relation to productivity. So that kind of hints that at maybe some of these reasons being harder to understand than others, I think.
I don't think people have any idea about, I mean, look, start with the most basic premise that we're talking about, one of the most basic building blocks, inflation. Why do prices rise over time? I hardly know someone that's not economically trained at the PhD level that can even muster a half an answer. They're completely dumbfounded, intelligent people, because they do inflation, right? They don't know what causes inflation. So I'm sure like this is all far beyond understanding. I think what's possibly a bigger contributor here than even like different types of efficiency and what people can understand is like the difference across products, right? So you see a big effect on chicken there. And you say, well, what the hell did you tell them that made them rethink chicken so much? I mean, you watch any sci-fi movie, right? What are they fighting about in the future? Meat, nobody has meat, and gasoline, right? Like, because clearly we can't keep making more chickens for more people. But, you know, there are a lot of things we do, and I just think people haven't thought about them, and it's very easy to, like, so, you know, we house chickens much more effectively now, and there's like multiple story dwellings. They've bred chickens that produce more protein from less feed, right? And we've cured a lot of chicken diseases. Our forecasting of demand, our shipping, our routing, our storage is all more efficient. The layperson may never have realized that there were such possibilities technologically to a TV. I can get that, right? Like but the chicken, right? Oh, really? Now that I'm thinking about it, I guess it could get cheaper. I suspect that those effects are even much stronger, or maybe I'm thinking, or maybe it's the same thing you're suggesting, different kinds of efficiencies. Okay, one more quick study. It's like super fast, because I did promise you that, you know, we've been messing with immigration, and I just think that it follows a similar pattern, right? Do you see immigration as zero sum, or and again, we can change that a little bit with efficiency primes, but we don't change it with scarcity primes. So here we had people get an efficiency prime, a scarcity prime, or nothing as it relates to immigration, 200 people per condition. And then we had people complete a scale which measured their zero-sum attitudes towards immigration. So we didn't necessarily borrow this, but it's inspired by earlier research on the topic, that how zero-sum people perceive immigration to be. So our prompts might look like this: like, we want to get your thoughts on how immigration relates to the economy. And we mentioned that immigration increases the pool of of available workers. We give people reasons to think that immigration may lower prices. We have them write about that. Or we mention that, look, immigration is more people, and that's more mouths to feed, and we make them write about something like that. And then we have them answer a 4-item scale, which basically taps into zero-sum beliefs about immigration that includes items such as increased immigration can make it harder for current citizens to benefit economically, or increased immigration makes fewer resources available for current citizens. Now, I don't want to oversell these results, because you know, by far the biggest predictor of how you answer these questions, like the lion's share of the variance, is unsurprisingly whether you are a self-identified Democrat or Republican. And it's not like we're going to have you do a quick study and answer a prime and totally change, right, those things. But we do get some movement. So the scarcity and the control. So first of all, the items have an alpha of like 0.94. So basically, we're asking the same question 4 times. Some people consider that good. I'm not sure why, but okay. So we can combine all the items together. And then you could just, like, here's the item average or the item index, however you want to think about it. And, you know, scarcity and control are exactly the same, just like they were with prices. And efficiency moves things down a little bit, right? So, and it is significant, although you know, I don't know, Yuri's already P-curving this, Joe and Leif, they're already P-curving this, you know, 0.04, 0.02. These effects are admittedly much, much more modest than the kind of the basic thing we're studying, that people overestimate the real prices of things. Because again, I think they're very hard to change, but you know, maybe it's making a couple people reconsider, oh yeah, it is more labor that you know, balances out the more mouths to feed or something. And people look at it as a little bit less zero sum when prompted that way. I'm not a big conclusions guy because I feel like I already said it, but we didn't crash. So I'm just repeating my if we do crash slide. People think real prices are going up, and they think of it for the kind of things that we ought to benefit from increased productivity. I'm not saying like the price of healthcare or a good education or a safe neighborhood. We're talking about groceries, durables, energy, right? Stuff that we ought to be producing more efficiently. They're wrong. And we think one reason why they're wrong is this efficiency neglect, right? They don't see the connection between their own beliefs about technological improvements and what that should mean for the cost of living or the standard of living. So I guess we're close to out of time, but I'm still here to entertain questions as long as you tell me we're still going.
Jason, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that we're not still going, so that everybody is licensed to go on with things. But that was great, really enjoyable, and I'm sure our audience appreciated it as well. And just as a reminder, unless Jason changes his mind, which he is allowed to do, we will eventually post this recording on YouTube, so you can share it with your friends or just relive the memories. And
I want the trolls to show up. Come on. Come on.
And all of the questions that you all submitted, we will give to Jason, so he will have your voice will be heard, even if it wasn't directly addressed today. But thanks everybody again for coming. We'll be back again next week with Maya Bar Hillel. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks a lot.